Welcome to Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook, a podcast that cuts through the noise to explain what's really happening in our democracy. Each episode breaks down key issues with insight from policy experts and change makers, giving you clear tips to take action. Whether you're fired up or feeling stuck, you're in the right place to get informed and get inspired, because democracy works best when we all participate. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of Democracy Does, the Civic Power Playbook. Since the conflict between Iran and the U.S. and Israel began more than a month ago, many of us have been feeling and seeing the pain at the pump. Whether you drive or take public transportation, we've all seen fuel costs go up. But what does that really mean, and how are international conflicts really reflected in our day-to-day? And why should we care? Well, here to break it down for us is Dr. Severin Borenstein. He is the professor of the graduate school in the Economic Analysis and Policy Group at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. Thank you so much for joining us and helping break it down for us.
Great to be with you.
Yes. We're happy to have you because this is some heavy stuff, and having an expert who can distill it down into basic terms for us would be very helpful. So first of all, why should we be paying attention to what is happening in Iran right now?
Well, this is probably not the most important reason we should be paying attention to what's going on in Iran. There certainly are larger moral and international conflict issues.
Yes.
But one reason it does get our attention is the price of gasoline has gone way up since the beginning of the war. And that is something that people directly experience by buying gasoline. Gasoline's unusual both in that the prices are right there on the street as you're driving,
Yes.
and that you stand there and stare at it while you're buying it for quite a while. It's not something you throw in your cart.
That's right.
So people are supremely aware of gas prices. The conflict in the Middle East is changing the world oil market, and that's the critical phrase. The oil market is uniquely integrated across the entire globe. So regardless of where you produce oil, in Texas, California, Venezuela, Ecuador, the Middle East, you are selling into a market where you can pretty easily shift your supply to wherever you can get a higher price.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, if there was some country that was getting its oil from the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz gets blocked, as it has now been for more than a month, that country has to go buy oil.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes into the international market and it starts contacting the various companies that manage the logistics and saying, where can I get oil? And they say, well, there's not as much on the market. You're going to have to pay more. And the price goes up. And that is true even in the United States, where the U.S. currently produces more oil than we consume. But that doesn't matter when it comes to the price. Those sellers in the United States also look at the international market. So if you go back to February 28th and you look at what happened to oil markets the day of the war started, what you see is that whether it was California's oil fields or Texas's or the Middle East or Africa or all the places that produce crude oil, the price went up, and it went up pretty much commensurately across all of those locations. Oil is the primary ingredient in making gasoline. So when the price of oil goes up, within a week or two, that change is fully incorporated into gasoline. And the standard rule of thumb is every $1 increase in the price per barrel of crude oil is 2.5 cents per gallon at the pump.
Okay. Thank you. That is really helpful. But I want to go back to something you said. If we produce more oil, if the United States produces more oil than we consume, then we should have enough. Why are prices going up if we already have stuff in our backyard, so to speak?
Because we don't produce oil. Oil companies produce oil. And we are in an open economy where they get to sell it where they want. And so if a refiner in the U.S. said, I'm not going to pay a higher price for crude oil. You're producing that in Texas. The Texas producer of the oil would say, okay, we'll sell it to that Asian refiner that is now short of crude oil. And that is true all over the world. So the fact that the US within our boundaries produces more crude oil than we consume doesn't really change how consumers are affected by it. What it does do is it means as consumers are getting hit by it and have less money to spend on other things, which is bad for the macroeconomy, producers are making more money, which is good for the macroeconomy. So workers in the oil industry and owners of shares in oil companies are better off and have more money to spend. So unlike the 1970s, when the US was a huge importer of crude oil, and when the prices went way up, we were really whacked by it as a country, that's not really happening as much as because there is this partially offsetting benefits to people in the oil industry.
Okay, then how about this? According to a recent article in the New York Times, I had read that companies have turned off 10% or more of the world's oil supply because tankers can't get through the Strait of Hormuz. So, by doing that, that means that, prices are just going to continue to go up. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that's a really important point. So we have oil blocked in the Middle East, and it's probably closer to 15% of
Hmm.
the world supply. In the very short run, you can manage that because there's a lot of inventories around the world. So
Yes.
the US has its strategic petroleum reserve that everybody hears about, so do other countries, but also the oil companies have tanks that have a lot of crude oil. So for a brief period, they can manage that and there isn't that much of a hit. So if you told them no oil is coming out of the Persian Gulf for the next week, that wouldn't move the needle because
Right.
everybody can just manage it. But what's going on instead is A, they don't know how long they're going to be blocked, that oil will be blocked. And B, they have finite inventories. So yeah, for a while, it's just like, if you couldn't get to the store, for a
Mhm.
while you could still eat fine because you have food in your house.
Right.
But as the days went by, it would get harder and harder. And the food that's in your house would become more and more precious, and that's what we're seeing. So there are these two offsetting uh, uh, tensions right now. On the one hand, if this continues and we really don't see oil coming out of the Middle East week by week, it's going to get worse and worse, and the price of oil is going to go up because we will be draining the inventories and we will be looking down the barrel of empty
Mhm.
storage. But on the other hand, if we do settle this, if Trump decides that he will make some sort of deal and the Strait of Hormuz opens up, we will fairly quickly see the price of oil go down. It probably will take a while to go down to where it was before the war started in the $60,
Mhm.
65, $70 range. Um, but it will drop substantially if there even news, as we've been seeing lately, even news that they might settle
Right.
this has driven down the price of crude oil. I do have to add, though, that, and I've done work on this, there is what's called a rockets and feathers phenomenon, that when the price of crude oil goes up, price of gasoline follows very quickly, goes up like a rocket.
Mhm.
But as the name suggests, when the price of crude oil goes down, it takes a long time for that to get through to the pump. So typically, fully incorporating changes on the way up takes a couple weeks. Fully incorporating changes on the way down can take 4 to 6 weeks.
Why? Why so long?
Well, there are different theories about that, but I think the best one comes from Matt Lewis, a professor at Clemson. He has done work showing that when the price of crude oil goes up, people start shopping around a lot to
Yeah.
find the best price they can. And then it's at some high level and it starts coming down. The psychological response is relief, and people actually start shopping around less. And he found this by looking at Gas Buddy data. How many hits does Gas Buddy get?
Yes.
And it turns out when the price of gasoline starts falling, Gas Buddy becomes less popular. Of course, if
Wow.
people don't shop around as much, there's less pressure on the gas stations to compete. And if they don't compete as much, the price doesn't drop as fast.
Interesting. Now, in your article, The Energy Economics of War, you did mention indeed prices. Then I'm quoting you. You say, indeed, prices would have jumped far more if it weren't for the fact that companies and governments have a lot of oil stored in various locations around the world. This goes back to what you just
Yeah.
touched on in terms of having a reserve, but having a finite reserve. Does that, is there any type of false sense of security that people have, or how
Oil
should,
markets don't have a false sense of security. If anything, I think their job is to worry about everything.
yes.
And there are traders. These are not the oil producers. These are people who are buying and selling oil. So they are constantly monitoring data on how full inventories are, how much oil is being produced, and so forth. So I don't think there's a false sense of security. I think there is an appropriate sense of worry,
Yes.
and I think there should be. The erratic behavior of the US government and the Iranian government makes this a much more volatile situation than we've seen in the past. Even the Russian invasion of Ukraine or the first Gulf War or all the other situations that drove up crude oil prices, we have seen more day-to-day swings in the price of crude oil,
Mhm.
where the war is going to go on for a long time, or the US is going to bomb and destroy all of Iran, or we have negotiations that look promising. And so you can just track the price of crude oil going up and plummeting and going up and so that is what we're seeing now. And I think that it is reflecting reality. There is real uncertainty about what's going to happen to the future crude oil supply, as well as, the fate of Iran and a lot of other things.
When one thing I did want to ask you about the Strait of Hormuz with Trump issuing a blockade, can he do that? Is that his to block? It's not
Okay,
his to block. How does that work?
I'm an economist, not a national security expert, but I've
Okay.
listened to a bunch of podcasts, and my impression is that they can do things to threaten to attack any ship that comes out of an Iranian port. And the Iranians have pretty much shut down all other shipping by threatening to attack any ship that tries to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Whether they will follow through on that is another question. There's been an interesting dynamic since the beginning of the war, that while the US and Israel were bombing all sorts of parts of Iran, what they weren't doing was bombing the tankers coming out of Iran, or while they're in the dock at Iran, because it's pretty clear Trump does not want the world oil market to be even shorter of crude oil.
Right.
So he was essentially allowing Iranian oil onto the market to keep the price down, probably for political reasons.
Mhm. Mhm. You also mentioned the human toll that this conflict is taking, just to circle back to the earlier portion of our conversation, because ultimately that's what really is, it hurts the most about this conflict. Can you talk a little bit about that, the lives that are being lost and displaced, but also in your essay you make a good point about the transfer of wealth and who is really benefiting from this. And we're not just talking about the companies, we're talking about oligarchs, people in power. Can you just
Oh,
touch on
yeah.
that briefly?
When the price of oil goes up, uh, it's not just that we pay more at the pump.
Yeah.
It's that there you have to look at who are the people paying for oil, and who worldwide are the people selling the oil.
Hmm.
And for not surprising reasons, the people selling the oil are disproportionately autocrats and oligarchs who are not very friendly to democracy and not very helpful to uh, low income countries. So we see Russia, particularly, is getting massively wealthy off of this. They're selling their oil for much higher prices than they were before the war. Russia is a big net exporter of crude oil. And so they are funding their war against Ukraine by selling crude oil. And that was true back before the war started. But before the war started, they were getting $60 a barrel for their oil. And now, for that same oil, same production cost, they're getting surely 50% more than that. So, the,
50% more.
yeah, so this is really a huge benefit to Russia. It's a huge benefit to Venezuela, any big oil producing country. On the flip side, oil is used, we think of oil in the United States as going into our cars. But
Yeah.
in the rest of the world, more of it is not used for transportation. It's used for electric generation, it's used for heating, and so forth. And those tend to be in lower income countries.
Hmm.
So if you look at the low income countries around the world, that you are seeing much more strain. The other way it is straining the lower income countries is through agriculture. First of all, the price of diesel went up even more than the price of gasoline,
Yes, I saw
and
that.
diesel is heavily used in agriculture.
Hmm.
Secondly, and the biggest effect is the price of natural gas on the world market, the US, not in US, but in the rest of the world, skyrocketed. And natural gas, one of the effects of natural gas prices is that it is a major input in making fertilizer. So this war is making it much more expensive to farm, both
Mm.
through the price of diesel and the price of natural gas and therefore fertilizer. And that means that in all the countries you can think of where food costs are not a few percent of budgets, but are a major part of people's lives, those costs have gone way up. And they are getting really hit hard by these higher energy prices through the higher food prices. Most low middle income countries have a much higher share of their of their GDP coming from making food,
Yes.
and in those countries, a much higher share of household incomes
Yeah.
or go to buying food. Even low income families who are getting hit in the US don't spend anywhere near the share of income that you see in most countries in Africa and many countries in Southeast Asia and so forth. So those countries, the consumers there are getting hit much harder than we are. Now,
Okay.
we're getting hit in the U.S., particularly, and these tend to be low income families, super commuters, the
Hmm.
people who
Yes.
live generally around expensive urban areas, like where I am in the Bay Area,
Uh,
and can't afford to live very close to their job and end up driving 100 miles or more round trip to their job every day, often typically not in EVs and not in new fuel efficient cars. They're driving low efficiency vehicles. So when the price of gasoline goes up, they are particularly hit by it.
right.
And they are the US consumers who are having the hardest time. Over time, this is going to filter through to everything we buy. So food will get more expensive because farming, of course, is going
Hmm.
to get more expensive. Diesel increases mean everything that goes around moves around in trucks, which is everything,
Hmm.
um, it gets more expensive. So we are going to anything that is a physical good that's shipped in a big truck, which is most things we consume,
Right.
is going to get more expensive because they got to recover the cost of the diesel.
Right. Right.
So, and then of course, what the Fed is worried about is people will start assuming that this is going to continue, what's called inflation expectations,
Yes.
and you could end up getting a much more aggressive inflation in the economy.
Okay, this all sounds quite dire. So, one of the things I like to do is I do want to end on a hopeful note because I think a lot of people they don't know what to do. They want to try to do something to either feel empowered or feel like they can make a change. And so I like to ask my experts about a power play, three power plays, three top tips that you would tell someone what they can do so they don't feel overwhelmed or hopeless. They feel like they can make a difference, they can be informed, and even maybe enact change in some way. Do you have three tips?
Yeah, these are tough in the short run because the oil market, they trade future delivery of oil as well as current, and they're actually forecast that future price. It's not perfect as a forecast, but it is suggesting they think the price of oil will go back down. Um,
Yes. I think did you mention that in an
I
essay?
did,
I
I
feel like I
did,
wrote that as well, but
and
please go ahead.
so it's a little harder to tell people, "Oh, this means you should invest in an
Yes.
EV or a better fuel economy car." In many cases, the answer is, "If I could have done that, I would have done it already."
Mhm.
But it's hard to tell them this is the new normal, that the prices will stay this high. If anything, I think that in the long run, if we actually do manage to get off crude oil, then prices are going to go down because there'll be
Mhm.
plenty of crude oil around.
Mhm.
Um, so, in the very short run, the thing I can tell you in some parts of the country, and California is the worst, is shop around.
Mhm.
Gasoline does not sell for the same price everywhere,
Mhm.
and so it is true that branded gasoline, the major brands, put other additives in. It's less. The people are less convinced, the scientists who study this, that it makes much difference. Um, so I go to an off-brand station near me, and in
Mhm.
California, which has a deeply dysfunctional gasoline market, it is 60 cents a gallon cheaper than the Chevron station 3 blocks away.
Wow.
So, I think shopping around always makes sense. It
Yes.
has the double advantage of both, uh, getting a better price and putting pressure on the expensive stations to lower their
Yes.
prices. I can mention, public transit, and,
Yes.
it's worth trying, but most people who are driving a car at this point will say, "Yeah, if that were a good option, I would have already been doing it."
Right.
I think in the longer run, it is important when you do buy a car to think through not just what am I paying for the car, but what is this gonna actually cost me to operate? And that
Yes.
means, that means getting a 30 mile per gallon car instead of a 20 mile per gallon car is like cutting the price of gasoline by a third.
Wow.
So, think of it that way, that,
Yes.
people don't focus on the miles per gallon as much as, the cost of the car, but, if they do think about the price of gasoline, so think about it
Yes.
that way. I think that is a very useful, approach. Um, and then I think in the longer run, thinking about the way we use energy,
Mhm.
we didn't talk about air travel. Air travel is gonna get very much hit by this. Fuels Airlines use jet fuel, which is very similar to diesel, and that price has gone up much more than gasoline as well.
Wow.
So if you were thinking about taking an trip on planes, you're going to be pretty surprised by the prices when you go look.
Oh.
If there's a way to do this is sounds counterintuitive, but to do those trips by car, um, you will save some money doing it by car instead.
Oh.
Of course, there are trade-offs. Your time,
Yes.
the safety. Air travel is incredibly safe compared to traveling by car. So there are trade-offs, but, air travel, I think, is one of the things that's gonna, even with all the prices rising, rise even more than the other things.
Excellent. Okay, that really helpful tips.
I'm
I
not sure
can't.
that was an optimistic
No,
ending, but it
you know
was,
what? It was
okay.
because anything that can give people just some type of tip, as simple as shopping around or
Yeah,
trying public transportation, anything, or even being conscientious when it comes to if I can drive somewhere versus taking a flight, maybe I'll consider my travel options. So options are good. People want to
yeah.
know they have options. Thank you so much, Professor Bornstein, for joining us. This was really, really helpful.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's great to be with you.
And now it's time to recap Professor Borenstein's top power plays. First, he says shop around for gas prices. You may be surprised by the differences in what you pay at different stations. Also, he says you don't necessarily need to use name brand gasoline. You'd be amazed at how much you could save by going generic. And finally, he says in the long term, if you are considering purchasing a car, make fuel efficiency a top priority. And if you want to learn more about Professor Borenstein and see some of his work at the Energy Institute at Haas, you can read his blog at energyathaas.wordpress.com. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you're feeling a little more hopeful, a little less stuck, and maybe even inspired to take action, because democracy does work when we all participate. And don't forget, sign up for our newsletter to get updates on when our next episode drops. You can go to my website, democracydoes.com. And as a bonus, if you haven't gotten one, a free and easy tip sheet on how to get involved.